What's going on, everybody? How's it going? This is Peter from CodeBoost, and in this tutorial we're going to take a look at React. React is a library built on top of JavaScript that helps the developer build a user interface more effectively. It is a library that's been around for a few years and it's gained a lot of traction. A lot of companies hire React developers, and it is a great tool for building web applications. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, the first thing that you're going to want to do, if you haven't already, go ahead and get Node.js installed on your computer. That's the only thing we need to do before we get started. If you've already got Node installed, then open up your command line and find a folder where you want to set up your project. We're going to use the command npx create react app, and then whatever you want to call your project. I'm going to call mine React tutorial. Feel free to call it whatever you want. How this is going to work is npx will go and grab the latest version of create react app for us, and it will use that boilerplate code to build out a project for us in a folder named whatever we type in here. So go ahead and get that started now. Okay, so hopefully your project installed properly. If it did, you should see a similar message to the one that's displayed here. And the next thing we're going to want to do is change directories into our project that we just created. We can do that by typing cd followed by the name of the project that you made. That name should be just right here. And once we're in that project directory, if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can actually go ahead and use a shortcut, code space dot, and that will open up a new instance of Visual Studio Code in that folder. Otherwise, if you're using another text editor, you're going to want to just open that text editor in this folder that you just created, and we'll see a freshly created React app here. If we open the source folder, there's plenty more folders and files. There's a lot going on here. If you're new to React, the good part is that you're only going to really need to pay attention to two different files. First one is going to be package.json, so go ahead and open that up. This package.json file is simply a file that will give us some of our project details for our application, the name here. We'll also see some dependencies. These are third-party libraries or code that other people have written that we're going to want to use in our project, namely React and React DOM here. Those are going to be very useful for creating a React app. We'll also see a set of scripts here. These are going to be the commands that we can use to initialize our application and do some other things. The main script that we're going to want is the start script. So go back to your terminal in that same folder. We're going to type npm start. We can also type npm run start. Both commands will work fine, and this is going to start up our development server in the browser for us. And this can take a few seconds to get started, so be patient. And that's pretty much all we're going to need in this package.json file. The main other file that we're going to do a majority of our coding in is this app.js file here. And this app.js file will have our app component. And this is where we are going to set up our application. You actually, there are some things that you can kind of glean out of this on this basic boilerplate code, and we see we've got it running here. But I think for the sake of this tutorial, let's go ahead and delete all of this code. We're going to start from scratch on this one. And at the top of any React file, any React component file, we are going to want to import React. So we'll import uppercase React from React in quotes as lowercase. And this is just the way that we can bring in that third-party code to set up our application. Now, React is a component library, or it's a library for JavaScript where we can create components. And what a component is it's just a chunk of code. We're gonna put various components together to make our applications, and this app component is going to be our main parent component. So the way we're going to set that up, we're going to say const uppercase app, and we'll set this equal to an arrow function. So go ahead and build this code out here. And in our arrow function, in our app component, we're also going to return some parentheses. we can put our markup here. So we can go ahead and add a div element here, and maybe inside this we can put a title. So we can say React app, you can put whatever you want in here. And so this is our main component. How this works is our component contains a section where we can type some JavaScript code. So inside our component, above this return statement down here, we can type any JavaScript we want up here. And inside the parentheses of this return statement, we can include markup. And this markup is going to be what's called JSX. If you're familiar with HTML, this is pretty much HTML. This looks exactly like HTML. The only difference is that in JSX, we can include JavaScript in our markup. And so what that means is we can write variables, we can set up functions up here, and we can run them in our markup code. Actually, before we get to that, let's also export this component. We're going to do that by typing export default and then the name of the component. We're also going to want to remember to do this in each of our component files. But if we go ahead and save and refresh, we will see our application is reloaded automatically. We've got our title that we included here. That's because React has a hot loading feature. If we're using Create React App, we get access to this hot reloading feature where we don't actually have to refresh the page. Anytime we save here, our changes will be updated here. And so the first thing that we can do in our React component is we can test out how our JavaScript variables will work. So say we wanted to include this title using JavaScript, we could say const title. We can make a title variable here, and we can set this equal to a string, and maybe we just take that same text and include that here. Now we have a JavaScript variable that's equal to what our title was before, and if we want to include that in our JSX, we could simply open some curly brackets and the name of the variable. And if we save, we'll get the exact same code. And how this is working is our JavaScript is declaring a string, and then our JSX code is interpreting this variable inside of these h1 tags. So this is a huge benefit of JavaScript. It lets us really write a lot of our logic in JavaScript and then return some HTML to show on the page, but we can also include JavaScript in that HTML. So this is a component here. We can actually go ahead and write another component now. For this tutorial, let's go ahead and make a list component, and we'll use the exact same syntax. It's just going to be an arrow function here, and it's going to return some JSX here. And so for now, I'm just gonna write list here so we can get this up on the screen. And now we have a second component here. We actually won't have access in our application to the second component until we include it in our app. So the way to do that is we are going to make a self-closing tag up here with our uppercase list component. And you'll notice it's a different color. This is actually a Visual Studio Code extension I have going on. And this just shows us that we have a component called list here. So if we save and refresh, we'll see that our text from our list component was included. That's because our list component is rendered inside of our app component. All right, so the app component is rendering a list component. So what if we wanted to have access to data in our list component? Our app component is going to include all of our data. Usually it's a good pattern to have things that you need access to in multiple places at the highest level that you can. So for example, maybe we want to make an array of items. We can call it a list in this example. We'll say list equals, well, you know what, actually, just to not confuse us, let's call it items. Let's say items equals 1, 2, 3. All right, so we've got an array of 3 numbers here. We have access to this array in our main component. In fact, if we want to display these numbers to the screen, we could actually go ahead and open some curly brackets, and we can map over these items. And map is a JavaScript method that is pretty common to use in React, so it's another one that's, I would say, very important to get used to. We'll see it all the time. So if we take our items array and we use the .map method, this method is a JavaScript method, and it will take any array and it will run a function for each element of that array. And so inside of this map method, we can include an arrow function. And inside of the arrow function's arguments, we will give it a name. This is an arbitrary name. I'm just going to call it item because each one of our items is an item. So we'll call it item here, and we will return a div. And so inside of these divs tags, we can actually go ahead and list out our item. If we do that and we save, we'll see we have 1, 2, 3. I know it's a little small. Maybe we add a label here. We can just say item and then a colon. This is actually still our markup. These curly brackets are our JavaScript though. So you'll notice it's kind of an interesting pattern. We've got a return statement here that has some HTML-like code. It's actually JSX. And then in these curly brackets, this is all JavaScript. And we're using the JavaScript method map. And we're returning some more JSX from our map method. And this JSX has some more curly brackets, which have some more JavaScript. So I know there's a lot going on here, but what you really need to know is that this is basically HTML that can include JavaScript anywhere you have curly brackets. That's the real benefit of JSX. So we've got our items here. If we save, we'll actually see we've got our labels here now too. And so we've got this items array in our app component. Unfortunately, we do not yet have access to items in this list component. And the way to do that is going to be using what's called props or properties. So when we declare this instance of the list component, we can pass these items down as well. And we can do that by setting items equal to some curly brackets, and inside we'll send the items down. And so this name is also arbitrary. We can call this whatever we want, but this items here inside the curly brackets is referring to this array here. So how these props or properties work is we will now have access to props in list if we include props as one of our arguments here for this component. And so this props variable is specific to React, and it's an object that includes all of the properties that we assign to the list component above. So for example, we'll have props.items available in our list component. And to show that out, we can actually grab our items that we mapped, grab everything inside these curly brackets, and we'll cut this. We can just replace this word list here. We'll go ahead and paste this down here. We'll also see we have an underline here, and that's because while this is called items in our list, it is one of our props. So we'll have to say props.items. And now here, if we save and refresh, we'll have the exact same thing. The list went away because we pasted over that. But now we have our title is included in our app component, and our app renders our list, and our list is now a separate component. So this is a very common pattern that we'll see in React. This is the way we're going to want to organize our components, especially if we have a lot of components. And we can actually go ahead and take this list and put it in a separate file. So go ahead and create a new file in your source folder called uppercase list.js. And in this list, we will go ahead and import React from React, just like we did in our app component. And then we'll go back to our app.js file, and we will cut out this list component that we created earlier. Go over to our list.js file, and under our import, we'll paste it in here. And we'll also want to remember to export this list. So export default list. So now we've got our list in a separate file. We can go ahead and save that. And if we go back to our app.js file, we'll see actually we have a red underline here. That's because in order to load this component on the screen, we will also need to import it. And we'll import our list from, open some parentheses, we'll say /, which just means the same folder that we're currently in. And then we'll look for list. And you'll notice there is a list and a list.js. Either one will do the same thing. React knows that if we don't include a file extension, that it is just a JavaScript file. So if we go ahead and save that, now we've got our components in separate files, which is a very good pattern to get used to in React. And so that is how to create components in separate files and pass down properties. Another concept that we're going to want to take a look at is going to be state. So the way to do that, in your app file, go ahead and add a comma after your React import. Open up some curly brackets rather, and we'll add this useState hook. We'll import this from React. This is also a import that comes built into React. And state is simply a way that we can keep track of our data, and we can update our data as well in a way that will make React happy. It'll also make us happy because it will be easy to re-render when we change the variables. So to do this, let's go ahead and create a useState hook. And how we'll do this, we'll go to the top of our app component, say const, and then an array. And inside this array, we'll include items and set items. We can go ahead and set this equal to useState, and then open some parentheses. And so this is a useState hook here. We're actually going to go ahead and copy this array. We can actually cut it out, paste the array into our useState. Make sure you didn't get that semicolon as well. And we'll just delete this. So before we had an items variable, now we have a slightly more sophisticated items hook. And how this works, this items variable here is the same as our previous items variable because it's initialized inside this useState method to be the same value, an array of 1, 2, and 3. And we'll notice we also have another variable here called set items. This is a method that this useState hook gives us where we can update this items variable if we need to. So we can go ahead and test that out. Let's actually pass this function down to our list just for practice, and we'll say set items equals set items, just like we did with the items. And we'll go ahead and save that. Now if we go back to our list component, if we wanted to, underneath this, we could go ahead and add a button. We could say change items here. And this will create a button underneath our list. And we can add a method, an event handler to our button. So we'll say onClick equals some curly brackets. This is somewhat similar to the onClick in HTML. The syntax is a little different, and we're going to set it equal to some JSX, the JavaScript in JSX, like we have been with these curly brackets up here. And here we can take our method, which was set items. Since we passed it down as a prop, we'll call it prop.setItems. And in order to add an argument to this, we'll actually have to make this an arrow function. This is just something that you'll want to get used to in React. Anytime you want to, should have a props here. Anytime you want to pass an argument into a method, we'll also need an arrow function. So say we wanted to update our array from 1, 2, 3, and maybe we'll make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 now. So if we save and refresh, we'll see we have a button here that we created. And if we click change items, we get 5 items now. And that's because we passed an onClick method here, and we changed our items state object, or our item state array rather, in our app function, we changed this items value from 1 to 3. We passed this set items down with props. We created our arrow function on click handler, and we changed the value of items. And this change, when we changed the value of items, our props also changed because we're passing down items. And since items was updated, our whole list component gets rendered again, and we have 5 items now. And so that's just another pattern in React you'll see. So this has been a basic introduction to React. I hope you got something out of it. If you liked it, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Check out the channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.